Great. It is 6:30 on Tuesday, March the 21st of 2023, and would like to welcome some new faces for many of us tonight to open our Littleton Conservation Commission hearing. And so we've got Mia McDonald with us, and right now Chrissy Hops and Daniel Payton will be joining us a little bit. Hopefully, he's at another meeting, but hopefully will be joining us. So would love it, Mia and Chrissy, if you just want to take just a few minutes and just say who you are and what you do, so that way we can understand how everything relates back to us for commissioners. That'd be awesome. Mia, you want to go first?
Oh, sure. My name is Mia McDonald. I'm the circuit rider for Mass DEP Wetlands Central Region. So I'm here just to answer any questions related to the Wetlands Protection Act. I'm the liaison between the wetlands section and the commissions.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I know we appreciate, and Amy appreciates you answering all our questions through the many years and decades. So that's great. Chrissy?
My name is Chrissy Hops. I am the assistant director with the Waterways Regulation Program, based in Boston, but we cover all the full Commonwealth, all of the regions. We do Chapter 91 application processing, and we issue permits and/or licenses depending on the scopes of work. Similar to me, we are here to answer questions. We want to be a resource for you and help give you the information that you need to point people in our direction. When should they be sent to us? And better safe than sorry. We're more than happy to get inquiries that we can look at and say, you don't need to come through, rather than people missing the process. So we're here to answer any questions you have.
That's wonderful. And I know that we all, as our commission, greatly appreciate your time helping us learn and really understand how we get all our tools in that toolbox. Amy, I know that you had sent off some questions regarding Chapter 91, which I believe everyone received. I would defer to you and Co-Chair Chase if we have a kind of an order of go of what we would like to do for this training here.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of to hang on a second, let me let everybody else in here. Carl and Daniel are coming in. Just kind of set the stage. We've got 5 great ponds in Littleton. So the commission's interested in corralling what's going on, and making sure that it's being done right and even-handedly across the board. And Chrissy, I know you've done this with a couple other towns. I don't know if you had an intro you just want to kind of hop into about Chapter 91, or if you just want to get into the questions that I'd sent you, or.
I think we can just get into the questions. For those other situations, it's really been a lot of Q&A.
Yes.
Nothing site specific, but more, these are the situations we see, or, these are the types of, these are situations we run into that,
That's great. Chrissy, should we take a second and have Daniel introduce himself? I saw that he just jumped in. So Daniel would like to welcome you to Littleton Conservation Commission. And so in the beginning, we just had everyone just say kind of hello that are helping us with these resources. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us what you do, that would be exciting.
Thank you very much. Please accept my apologies for being a few minutes late. I was eating a little bit of crow for calling a state senator, a city councilor. So you're lucky. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Anyway, thank you for having us. Again, my name is Daniel Pageant. I'm the program chief at DEP Waterways Program. I'm not sure what eloquent words could be said about 91, but we've got a theme not as large as we'd like, and we've got lots of great ponds and rivers and streams in the coast to protect access for. Your great ponds are ours to protect as well. So not sure what other eloquent words I could offer, but we're happy to hear. We're happy to be here. Happy to answer your questions, and we'll do the best that we can to answer them.
That's great, and we certainly welcome you and appreciate your time. So, Amy, what would you like to do? Have Chrissy kind of start to go through some of our questions, or what would we like to do?
Sure. Do you have those in front of you, Chrissy, or do you want me to kind of read them out to you?
Sorry, I had them up and then I lost my mute button. Yes, I do have them open. So one of the questions, or the first question, was the commission's looking for more information on Chapter 91 jurisdiction and the overlap with the Wetlands Protection Act. So the landward limit of Chapter 91 jurisdiction within Great Ponds is the natural high water mark. The natural high water mark is the location where high water existed prior to human alteration, either by dredging or damming or, other modifications, fill. So that's the limit of our jurisdiction. For a great many Great Ponds, that's going to coincide with your ordinary high water mark. So you could safely say that anytime you have a project where it's going to touch the water, whether that's a retaining wall, a dock, temporary or permanent, moorings, or any of those structures, anything that's going in the water, you're going to want to point them towards us. Now, my understanding, and this is maybe, I think, where Mia can jump in, this is, it's land under waterways, which is where you're going to have that overlap in jurisdiction. There are different regulations, so there isn't any overlap in the regulatory jurisdiction. It's just the physicality that something in the water is being regulated under the Wetlands Protection Act, but also under Chapter 91. So I don't know if that makes sense.
In that case, then an applicant in front of us would also completely independently need to pursue authorization under Chapter 91 with the state.
Yes, that's correct. One of the prerequisites for someone filing an application under Chapter 91 is to have first filed the NOI. My understanding is that the sequencing was set up that way generally because the resource management, that's generally what will modify a dock, whether it's a location, the size, the support types, or other structures going in the water. It's typically going to be the resource management that may adjust a project. We have certain standards for setbacks, but those are specified where feasible in a lot of situations. So if there's a situation where our regulations say you have to have a 25-foot setback from your abutting property line, and let's say for some reason, to avoid bank impacts, or because there already is maybe a degraded area, and so in order to protect resources, you want it to be 15 feet from the setback. That would be something that we would look to and say, that's a feasible reason why it can't be situated in this other location. So that's typically where that movement in a project is going to occur. And ideally, someone is in your process and has that information before they apply to us. The way it's been described to me is, they come to Chapter 91 after the cake is mostly baked, and then we just put the icing on.
Chrissy, can you walk us through, please, the application process and perhaps the fees that are associated with this? And can it be, once the NOI is done, may it be the landowner as the applicant, or does it have to be certified engineer? Who can submit that permit application to you?
So it's 99% of the time it should be the landowner. There may be a situation, our regulations don't require that the landowner be the applicant. So let's say somebody has, a lease, they're renting a property for, 20 years, and the landowner doesn't want to be the one who goes through the process. Anyone else can be the applicant. It should generally be the landowner. But the landowner always has to sign off on our application unless the applicant has other legal evidence of authority to apply. So that could be, I'll use an example. Some people have, there may be an easement passing through a property but that easement should say, a lot of the ones we see, it's to pass and repass. That's not something that says you can build a dock and maintain it on this property. It just means you can, pass through. So there is some nuance to that, but the engineer, for a lot of small scale projects, they don't necessarily need an engineer, but that person can be the consultant that files the application, but the applicant, or what we call the permittee in our new online platform, just to confuse everybody, that will almost always be the property owner. In terms of the process, so again, they need to have first filed the NOI. Once that's done, we can process an application, but we do need the final order of conditions before we can issue our final license. And that just allows them the opportunity to start moving our process forward once they know this is the project that is, going through. We have a few different processes. There are two which were sort of developed to have simplified process for homeowners, ideally to be able to do by themselves without the need for an environmental professional or an engineer. So for both of those, and we have, I can send you a link to our webpage where we have information and instructions on all the different application types. That's something that you can share with, your residents. Also, I'll send along our programmatic email address. We have a number of different staff who monitor that email in order to make sure that people are getting prompt responses and that, we're getting everyone information quickly. But so we have those two processes. That one is called a general license certification. There's a general license that was issued, one for inland waterways and one for coastal waterways. And you wouldn't have the coastal one, but the inland one is recorded within the registries of deeds of every county. And the coastal one, similarly, anywhere there are coastal waterways or tidelands. That's also recorded within every registry. And what the applicant submits is a self-certification. It says, I meet these standards. Here is my plan. The plan can be hand drawn as long as it has the basic information that we need: location, dimensions, setbacks from property lines. So that general license certification is one application type where there is no discretion with respect to setbacks. So on inland waterways, it's 15-foot setbacks from abutting properties. If someone has a shoreline that doesn't accommodate that with respect to their dock or structures, or if for some reason it needs to be sited somewhere else, that doesn't mean they can't get a license. It's just not through that process. They would just need to go through a different application process. The other one is the simplified license, and that's also very much like a self-certification where a lot of the public notice, the notifications, the comment period for both of those application types, that all happens before they actually submit an application to us. I'm going to go back over to the first one, the general license certification. When a public notice is issued for that, they have to notify a number of municipal agencies, one of them being the Conservation Commission. One of them is the Planning Board. And our regulations direct comments from the public, if they have any, to the Planning Board. And it's the Planning Board who can submit comments to DEP. So, I mean, the public could submit comments to us also, but what we're looking for is feedback from the Planning Board. If they look at a project and say, we don't believe it meets these standards, or we're fine with this project, we believe it does meet these standards. So that's something that's a little bit different from everything, every other application type where the public is notified and they're directed to submit comments to us. And again, I'll send you a link and sort of point to where each of these are. I'll send a separate link for each of them just so you can take a look. It might be helpful just to sort of skim through the instructions and the information that we have in there, just to sort of familiarize yourself with those. But so the other application type, the simplified, that one has standards of 25-foot setbacks, and that's where it has where feasible. So that's where we get into that discretionary. If someone doesn't meet the self-certification, they can go through this other simplified process. Similarly, they're not required to have an engineered or have engineered plans. They can do those by hand. They should, we have a template for them to use where it identifies this is what your plan should look like. This is the information that we need. And then the other one that you'll generally see for any project that doesn't fall within those thresholds would be it's called a WW01. It's just our standard water dependent application. And so that's for anything else. There are some thresholds for inland waterways. The self-certification is 300 square foot limit. So that would include, that's your dock. There isn't, that's only docks that are eligible under that self-certification. It's not applicable for retaining walls or any other structures. It's just docks. And they need to be non-commercial, associated with a single family residence. For the simplified license, that's what that middle one, that has a limit of 600 square feet. That can also have other structures. So that could be a retaining wall where, let's say it goes into the waterway 2 feet and it's 100 feet long. That's your 200 square feet plus your dock. The combined total of the dock, the retaining wall can't exceed 600 square feet. And then the O1, the standard application, that's for anything that doesn't fit within those other thresholds.
Chrissy, a
I feel
couple
like I'm giving
times.
you a lot of information.
Yeah, no, this is really helpful. Thank you. I think some of us are drinking from a fire hose here a little bit, but so excuse redundant questions maybe. So a couple of times you mentioned feasibility determinations. Does Mass DEP have specific criteria that are applied in those evaluations? Or if you don't, what are you typically looking at to evaluate the feasibility of doing work outside of the setback or within?
So, like I mentioned, relative to maybe resource protection, so that would definitely be something that we would look at if the applicant comes to us and says, the Conservation Commission wants this over here because, for X, Y, and Z reason, we would be looking, and that's where we would generally either reach out to you directly if they didn't have something that articulated that, whether it was in an order of conditions or some other correspondence. We would want to hear that directly from you just to verify that that's, that is what's being requested. It's not just because it lines up with their pathway. And other things that we see, topography, water depth, those are all, there are a lot of locations where there are, boulders or other shallow sort of obstructions or even just shallow water depths that would limit where you would put a dock on a property. We also look at where are docks on adjacent properties because we want to make sure that, everything's being licensed in locations where they're not going to conflict with one another.
Changing gears for a second, when you're looking at these, are you evaluating the dock itself in the context of material, construction, things like that? Or is this, I guess, does that ever come up in your evaluations?
Not generally. I won't say never because never say never, but
Sure.
what we're looking at is the basic footprint. Where is this going? How does it affect potentially someone's access? Whether, is it going out too far? Is it going into a channel where there's no other access and it would be blocking that channel? Is it going, is it skewed over in one direction? There are a lot of locations, especially on ponds, where you may have sort of this, cove situation and everybody's docks are pointing right at one another. And, how do you orient the riparian extension, the extension of the riparian lines to try to make sure that everybody has an equal share of the water sheet? So those are things that we really look at. The materials for any of the self-certifications and also in our standard license, there is a condition that requires the applicant ensure they're either certifying that everything will be built in accordance with standard engineer design standards. There's a condition in each one of the licenses that requires that. So that's not something that we're looking at. Again, in terms of materials or, whether things are seasonal or permanent, there are certain standards for the certain application types. But if somebody came in and they said, I want a 1,000 square foot permanent dock in front of my house, we would be looking again, is this the minimum necessary for what you need? It can't be something that's designed like they just want a big platform where they're going to use it as basically an extension to their property. Because that is considered a non-water dependent use, which that's a whole different, there's not a lot of that we see on Great Ponds, but we do look to try to ensure that they won't be used that way, that it is the minimum necessary. That's one of the standards, but that it's very subjective. Someone can say, I need this space because, my uncle's in a wheelchair. And so I need this additional width, where a lot of other docks, maybe the standard in an area is 5 feet wide, and that's what everyone accepts. And someone can come and, take the position that this is why they need something more. That's just one example. There are, thousands.
Let me add to that a little bit. Thank you for saving me something there. Chrissy, one of this, no, that's good. No, you're on a roll. Why would I jump in? I want to add that all of our licenses that are issued for the last 3 years, at least, and going forward, contain a prohibition on the use of unencapsulated polystyrene flotation.
That was my question.
Sorry, I got that question on my first day on the job, and it is a relatively new standard condition. The use of unencapsulated polystyrene for a replacement or new facility or new flotation is not allowed. We are not going around telling people to remove unencapsulated polystyrene. Guess I would if I could, but we're not allowing that. No, the licenses prohibit that use going forward. So anyway.
Thank you for that clarification. That actually gets right to sort of what I was, part of what I was looking at.
No, that's good, because we have that issue in Littleton with that polystyrene floating over lakes, and we were trying to figure out how to handle it.
Well,
we still don't know how to handle it.
Send them in for licenses.
yes, suggest they get a license, and we'll.
So, from what you're telling me, that every structure in the water should have some type of license.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And my whole tenure at the Concom, I'm not sure if I remember anybody getting a Chapter 91 license that I personally know of, but Amy probably knows more than I do. But
They have, but you all wouldn't routinely see it because it comes after the order of conditions. The boat ramp over at Mattawanakee definitely got a Chapter 91. And I think the last wall at, 43 Mattawanakee at least said they contacted DEP about a need for a Chapter 91, but they were above ordinary high, or whatever you'd want to call it.
Yeah, so Amy has, but we don't. But I'm kind of thinking that we probably have a lot of docks in the water that do not have licenses. That would be without knowing, that's kind of my mindset on things.
I mean, does DEP, the last time I did Chapter 91 was ages ago, and I actually had to do a file search, and it was horrendous, because it was all paper trail. There's no way we can just find out what licenses are in Littleton, can we? Are they organized that way? Do we need to go by address?
So we have a couple different databases. One is pre-1996, one is post-1996, and then now since the end of 2020, and we've been transitioning to an online application platform. So anything that we've received that would have been either that the general license certificate or the simplified license, those would all be on our online database. Those were the first two application types that went live in that system. There could still be other ones that were submitted after that, but before it was November of 21 when we moved all of our other application types. So there was sort of that limbo year where things are in different places, but we do have a qualifier in our databases that lists the municipality. It's not entirely reliable, only because our databases have never been QA/QC'd. So but we could send those to you. You could just filter them by municipality and then just have what's in Littleton. That would be your list. You can also go to our online access for those records and then just type in Littleton into the town name and see what pops up there. Ideally going forward, it's going to be much more reliable, but we do have a lot of information.
If it doesn't pop up, it doesn't mean there's a license. It just means it's not in the database.
Our databases are fairly complete. I'm not going to say complete.
Yeah.
Because we do find something from time to time, but they have the bulk of the information, even it's applications and licenses. So it's all applications that were submitted. Again, I'm saying all, that's just a representation, but
there are over 30, we have over, I think, over 31,000 licenses that have been issued since the beginning of the Public Waterfront Act in 1866. Our data, as Chrissy said, our databases are not perfect. There's a lot of information in them, and while it may be difficult to find an address, sorting by municipality, I think that's a pretty solid search. So we're happy to we send out this database all the time. We're happy to send this to you, and it's a couple of very simple Excel strokes to come down with the list of the ones in Littleton, and it also has the address listed in many, many cases. So
if I can ask a question, and I think I concur with Carl that I believe that the vast majority do not have licenses here in the town. And I'm sure that you're working with other towns and other municipalities that are in our same position. Do you have suggestions to us going forward? Like, because there's the grandfathering of perhaps something that's already there, how do we go forward and not make it look like it's all full throttle? How do we approach the community? Have you seen success stories, or can you tell us things that did not go well when they tried to implement this in a structured manner?
One thing I'll mention is just that almost nothing is grandfathered. There are exemptions for certain public service projects, and they're limited. There are exemptions for certain scopes of work that are located within non-tidal rivers and streams. That's another jurisdictional area. I'm not sure if you or the general regulated public is aware of, but that non-tidal rivers and streams that are navigable, where public funds have been expended again, these are also things. What I can do is send you maybe just a Word document that has a couple of these key definitions and some of these other jurisdictional descriptions so that you have those handy. But we don't want the town to feel like you need to be doing anything other than guiding people towards us. So when they're coming in they're submitting an NOI, you see something in the water, pointing them towards us as a first step, just making them aware. That's what we find to be helpful. I have seen in some, and Mia, maybe you can jump in here. I've seen in some orders of conditions, I don't know if this is a standard condition across the board or if it varies depending on the municipality, but that have a condition that says you're required to obtain your Chapter 91 license. I don't know if it says, if needed or if required or something like that, that somehow ties the Chapter 91 authorization to the certificate of compliance for the order of conditions. And so again, Mia, I don't know if that's a requirement, if it's a standard. I don't know if it's something that you want to start looping in, because compliance with Chapter 91 really isn't within the purview of the Conservation Commission. So it may not be something that you want to have as part of your authorization and a determination of compliance. But it's also a good hook to get people to get their Chapter 91 authorization, whatever it may look like.
Yes, other commissions are requiring a copy of the Chapter 91 license to get a certificate of compliance. I've also heard of other commissions who are requiring an application to the Chapter 91 program prior to the start of construction. There were some commissions who required a Chapter 91 license prior to the start of construction, and that did not go well because there was this one very bad where the applicant just couldn't seem to grasp. The applicant also did not reach out to the Chapter 91 program, just kept trying to do it on their own, never submitted it fully. And it went on for a long, and it was like, he's like, it's been 2 years and I still can't get my dock. And it's like, so they modified it to must show that they've completed an application prior to the start of construction so that they've actually successfully contacted the waterways program and initiated that process. And one other bad story I've heard is that there was one commission who the chairman took it upon himself to go out on a boat on Saturdays and serve enforcement orders to people on their docks. He got the database. I don't know if you heard this, Chrissy and Daniel.
No.
We got the calls and he's like, he thinks he's a police officer, and he ruined somebody's 4-year-old granddaughter's birthday party by issuing an enforcement order in the middle of the birthday party. Very bad. You are not the police, So yeah, the most successful commissions I've heard so far, and we're going to have, the Suasco watershed that we meet every other month. We're going to try to have one of those meetings probably in the fall, where we're going to ask other commissions. And maybe by then you guys will be one of those commissions that instituted a program and can come and tell us how it went. And ask commissions what they're doing and what's working and what isn't. Because I know Webster. Yeah. Webster's really, and so what Webster is doing right now, we can ask them how it's working for them, is as people are coming in, they're not policing, they're not walking up and down the lake saying, you, they're just waiting for people to come in. And when they come in to replace the retaining walls, raise the house and rebuild, anything they say, okay, you also have to do, let's get you all in. One of the special conditions people often put in their orders of conditions, or a special condition on a determination of applicability, is that the project must be in compliance with all other permits. That's building permit, that could be zoning if they need a variance, and that general condition also applies to Chapter 91. If they're out of compliance with Chapter 91, then they're technically out of compliance because you don't want your permit to proceed without those others. But there's also a state law for local permits, and your determination and order of conditions is considered a local town permit. It's a state law, but it's a town permit that people may proceed with any permit. They don't have to get their zoning permit before their building permit. They don't have to get their Board of Health before they get their conservation. They're allowed to proceed in the order that suits their project. So you want to make sure that you're not holding anybody up, but you're guiding them along in the process, pointing them towards the waterway office and making sure that they want to make sure that their boxes are getting checked.
Right. And we don't want the town to end up in a situation where you feel like you're the body who's enforcing Chapter 91, because that falls to us. It's so whatever, maybe it's something you want to discuss, talk to other towns and get some more information. But that's just my sort of, my knowledge of what I've heard, but it isn't something, unless, unless there's some law that you're required to include. We really are just looking to educate the public, have them come into compliance. We realize that there are a lot of people out there that aren't aware of Chapter 91, and we don't think they're intentionally being violators. They're just, we'll get them as they come to us.
Mia, have you seen the requirement for a Chapter 91 license to receive a certificate of completion challenged in any scenario?
Not yet. I have seen it challenged to begin construction. We kind of had to intervene and say, maybe we need to make an amendment and change that condition. But it was more like an administrative change, And there's a big intersection. You do regulate the performance standards. You implement those performance standards for bank and land underwater. So you want to, make sure there's no alteration, that the alteration meets the performance standards. And remember, they are allowed to alter 10% or 50 feet of their bank as long as it's not significant to habitat. You can require habitat evaluation. So that's where the real intersection is where you're really looking at. But I'm finding a lot of commissions calling me and saying, our commission meetings are going on and on and on because we're arguing with applicants about the square footage of their dock. If you notice that a dock is egregious, it's 2,000 square feet, or it's got multi-levels, it's got a roof over it, it's got patio furniture on it, you can say, I don't know if that dock meets 91. You're going to want to call the 91 program, but it's not the commission's job to enforce that. And if they blow you off, you can call and email. Does Chrissy and Daniel, do you have an online anonymous form? I think all DEP does. Or you can just make a complaint.
I think there's a DEP form. It's not specific to waterways, but someone can identify what their concern is in there. I would say, if someone's looking to do something anonymously, it should not come to the DEP waterways email because everything is a public record.
Yep,
So.
but you can use the form stack online, make a DEP complaint. You can call Chrissy, you can call me and say, I'd like to make an anonymous complaint. Because I understand sometimes it's neighbors.
So I think, Amy, as we're looking at time, I think we could all talk about this all night long, but we recognize we do have a 7:30 meeting. So I'd like to kind of come back to our original list of questions and see if we can go ahead and follow through that a little bit more. If we can, that would be great.
I did have kind of two questions. One is in terms of natural high water, ordinary high water. I think all 5 of our ponds, except for maybe Fort Pond, Long Pond's controlled by a beaver, basically, God help us, are dams or weirs. So who knows where the historic natural high water was? Do we still just go with whatever we can figure out best case? And this is as much a question for me of what ordinary high water is in those situations. Because certainly in Forge Pond, they also do dural downs every year. So,
Amy, ordinary high water, with regard to Chapter 91, the limit of jurisdiction is the ordinary high water, which is the current high water, not the natural or the original high water mark, but rather the current high water mark, current annual high water.
And you don't have that established, especially for ponds. It's just every time someone does it, they try to.
The waterways program does not. There are various other programs at DEP that may have monitored water elevations for various reasons over the decades. I don't know. That there is information out there. In some cases, it's spotty and not guaranteed to be entirely correct, but others have tried to figure it out in the past. So we're not going to. The waterways program is not going to go out and critique the methodology for calculating ordinary high water. If something looks off, we're going to say, what's going on here? But we don't go out there and measure water elevations.
Right. Especially in the case of the hand-drawn plans where someone's just sort of identifying relative to their shoreline or where a dock is going. This is where the water is high and this is where the water is low. And, we're looking for adequate water depth and jurisdictional limits, basically. Something I did think of when we were talking about a little bit of overlap with wetlands in Chapter 91, there is something that I see very frequently in orders of conditions where the land underwater impact that's identified will be solely the piles or the pipes or the frame or whatever it is that's the support structure, but I won't see any reference to the dock itself. So let's say there's a 600 square foot dock, but in that sort of checklist portion of the order of conditions where it identifies these are the impacts. So I'm not sure if that's something, because you're looking at this and again, when I say you, I mean conservation commissions, you're looking at the dock and saying this isn't an impact. It's just the actual support structures that are an impact. Now, as long as I see it on the plans that are referenced, it's not an issue. But there are some situations where I've seen an order of conditions and it will say dock, but I don't see anything about land underwater. So that's, and maybe it's not even on a plan, because I think in those situations, it may not be clear to the Conservation Commission that they still have that regulatory authority, even though Chapter 91 does also.
Well, Mia, for example, if there is a floating dock, which is just tied or maybe anchored, it's not on land underwater. It's just in the water column. How would you recommend that the impact be characterized?
Though, so that's still squishy. You know, the same thing with boardwalks, you know, different people are finding different. You have to look at what's going on around it. You know, in some cases you think about shading impacts, but if it's a raked out lake bottom, the shading's not really going to impact the stuff that's not growing down there. You want to think about passage of wildlife. That's another one of the interests. You want to look at the interests of the act for each of those. So for bank, it's passage of wildlife, flood control. You also want to think about icing conditions. If any of your ponds ice over and it's a floating dock, you may want to require in your order of conditions that they bring the dock in at a certain time of year.
So I know Sarah wants to go down a list, but one question popped to my head. One of the issues we're having in town now, they're putting down weed mats as a method of controlling aquatic vegetation, and invasive aquatic vegetation, and that's just starting. That seems to me that would be regulated.
That's definitely regulated. Yeah, that should be done under an order of conditions.
And also under Chapter 91.
Because I think the folks, it's Westford Littleton. I thought the folks in Westford had reached out. Or maybe it's just in their experience that Chapter 91 wouldn't be required. And my issue with that actually is like, who the heck's the landowner or something like that? Because it's entirely underwater. We did tie them back to the landowner for the recording, but really it's the state that owns under there. Is that correct?
So in a case, if it's an enlarged pond, then the Commonwealth fee ownership, and I'm only saying this because it's in the regulations, the Commonwealth fee ownership starts at the low water mark, so the natural low water mark of a great pond. While the Commonwealth controls under 91, we control the water sheet, no matter how big that pond gets. The land under that, I believe, is owned by the landlord property owner, unless there's something special something different going on there. That's the tip. I believe that to be the typical case.
So I tell you, should we recommend that these benthic mat people get in touch with you?
Yes, please.
And I think Sarah, the only other thing maybe that we didn't really get into is beach nourishment something that Chapter 91 looks at, or is not really a structure?
It's so it's considered fill, but it's something, it's permittable for any portion of that's being placed below the ordinary high water mark, that would need to get a permit from us.
I think that was everything, unless something popped into their head.
I had a couple of questions, Amy, about just the logistics and timing. So, not that we intend to be the be all and end all of sources of information on Chapter 91, but Chrissy, can you walk me through sort of the timing and documentation requirements? I think you've touched on some of these for a typical project. Let's say a small dock. Like, what does that typically look like in your world?
So for those small docks that will meet either the general license certification or the simplified license, they're going to need to be completely through they'll need to have their order of conditions before they even apply for those two types of licenses. When I was describing how they could, get started, they could file the NOI and then apply. That's just for our standard application. So essentially those two processes, it's supposed to be somebody walks in the door with everything and we're just checking the boxes. We're just, making sure, yes, everything that they said is correct. But so they would need to do a Chapter 91 public notice. That's something that a lot of the public get confused about because there's also often a public notice for the Conservation Commission process. So for them to understand that their prior public notice does not satisfy the Chapter 91 notification, that's important. That's something that we try to highlight.
Those notice requirements, are they, aside from the fact that it's not part of the Wetlands Protection Act process, similar in terms of notifying abutters and ad in the newspaper kind of thing, or does it look differently for you?
It's similar, ad in the newspaper. It's the local Conservation Commission, Planning Board, municipal official. So that would be the select board or mayor, depending on the government structure. There is the abutter definition is very different for Chapter 91. It's properties along the shoreline that abut the project site. So it's not you don't do a certain certain length radius. It's anyone abutting the project shoreline and then also within 50 feet across a waterway. So any of those parcels, but that definition that's in our instructions, it's actually in like the online form. There are little things that like it's written out. It says this is a butter. But yes, it's, and then, so they publish in the newspaper, they send certified to all of those parties. There is some variation between the two application types, but that's pretty much it. And then after the 30-day public comment period is completed, then they submit their application online along with their plan, a copy of their order of conditions, a copy of the plans that are referenced in the order of conditions. Those are the basic requirements, and a set of Chapter 91 plans. I'm not sure if I said that, but those are the basic requirements for our process. We then take a look, make sure that, someone is in the right process, that, they didn't identify something incorrectly. And if there were any comments received that, let's say, a bunch of neighbors are unhappy or one neighbor is unhappy, we'll send those to the applicant and give them an opportunity to respond. If we see something where, again, the siting of a dock where it doesn't, something we have to say, why is it not feasible for you to comply with the standard? We also give them an opportunity to address that because, for the most part, they don't know that they need to do that in the application. We then, after we do a preliminary review, make sure we have what we need and make sure they're in the right process, we'll send them what's called a proof of signature. So at this point, that's where it's kind of our application form, that if the applicant is the property owner, they just sign it, send it back. That can be done electronically. If the property owner is someone else, then they would need to go get their signature also. Same thing, send it back. And then from that point, we begin to prepare the draft of the license.
That's helpful. Thank you.
And what's the kind of general time frame from start to finish?
So our time frame specifies
The
that once
simplified
we
ones.
have a complete application, we have 60 days to either issue our decision or identify if there's any outstanding information. And I will say that front end piece, that it's a struggle. It's like pulling teeth a lot of the time to get all of the information from people to make sure that everything is correct on plans. We have very detailed instructions. They can be intimidating, and also people sometimes just don't like to read them. Just give it a go. But that's part of working with the individuals, and we try to help them through it.
So
If I can, I would just like to see if Kyle or Andrew or Carl, if anyone has any last minute questions or thoughts of things that we've not covered yet. We just have a few more minutes left.
I got a question if no one else wants to. it's just a quickie, but your program was passed down under a general permit from the Corps of Engineers. So the people going through 91 don't, if it's below if it fits your criteria, don't have to worry about a Corps permit necessarily, right? That permit.
No, the Army Corps of Engineers is federal. That's entirely independent from Chapter 91.
But they cover, their jurisdiction is in the same water bodies, navigable waterways, correct?
It's been a while. It's been a while since I've worked with the Army Corps general permit. Do one of the general permits address docks within rivers and rivers
I
and
think they
ponds?
do, and aren't they revamping them now? I think one of the Massachusetts general permits is getting, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's about to expire, like
Yeah.
this end of this month, I think.
Yeah,
But
there's lots of jurisdictions. There's Wetlands Protection Act, there's Chapter 91, and there's Army Corps under the Clean Water Act. 3 separate processes. There are certainly instances where the Chapter 91 program may, relies upon, there's some connectivity to certain projects. The Wetlands Protection Act. I'm not aware of any with the Corps. Perhaps the Army Corps will allow something that's got a 91 license to be, self-certification. But again, it's been 5 years since I've even worked with a Corps permit. So if you get a Corps permit, you still need one from us.
I'm just trying to keep it clear in my head as to the jurisdictions and the general permits that have been issued. I think the Corps regulates, and it's definitely navigable waterways. I'm not sure if it's title navigable waterways or not, but
What's the Section 10 stuff?
Section 10. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Because 401, the water quality cert is fairly explicit about when you would need to apply. If you have an order of conditions and it's, you're not going over the 5,000 square feet, then you're probably okay with water quality cert. I forget what the Army Corps is.
So,
Either from 404 or Section 10.
Yeah. So personally, I'm not aware of any instances where the Corps relies upon a 91 to grant some authority under the Corps jurisdictions. But there are no such instances where if you have a Corps permit, that satisfies Chapter 91. That connection does not exist. 91 is a state act, Public Waterfront Act from 1866, updated lots of times. There is no federal nexus that allows a federal permit to fulfill that state requirement. Sorry about that.
So continuing on with jurisdiction and going back to our at hand example of docks degrading of polystyrene, I'm still unclear on jurisdiction and how we go about getting that cleaned up. My understanding is property owners are just throwing their hands up and saying, nope, not my responsibility. Who should we be pursuing, or how do we pursue getting that situation rectified?
Do you describe a situation where there's a bunch of polystyrene floating around in the lake and it all gets sucked up into some marsh, at the end or something like that?
Correct.
I haven't been able to actually see it myself because it's all private property. One of the neighbors threw their neighbor under the bus because his dock's falling apart.
Well, the specific requirements, the specific prohibition on unencapsulated polystyrene, as far as I'm aware, began at the very end of 2019. I'm not certain of any prohibition before that. Perhaps under the Wetlands Protection Act, not under 91. So I don't know, Mia, are you aware of any wetlands protection or water quality cert?
Yeah, once the polystyrene or beer cans, whatever it may be, once it starts getting into a wetland, floating in the water column is tough, but eventually it's going to blow off to a bank or a marsh, then it's fill. But then also with litter, like how do you prove who littered? The only way to do that is to write a enforcement order or a violation letter, but just the regs are silent on violation letters, but I know a lot of towns use them, to the landowner. And then the landowner has to try to, in their civil court manner, figure out who's trespassing with the litter. that would be a private matter. You can only,
I mean,
unless
the
you
prob-
observe it.
I was gonna say the problem with, I mean, I'm thinking even if you had a local ordinance independent from, wetlands or waterways or anything like that, that just says this, we don't want to allow this. I think you still run into the issue of if you're going to require people remove them without giving them some sort of, you have to do this within 3 years or you have to do this within 2 years. That's where I think you get the backlash. Not that I'm saying it may not be worth it for the health of the system, but that I think that's where people would say, you're putting this burden on us to go. Now I have to go buy a new dock. I just bought this dock last year. I didn't know I wasn't going to be allowed to do it. Now again, if they come to Chapter 91, we have that prohibition, and they are attesting to the fact that they meet all of the standards in either of those self-certifications, or it's a condition of their license. So they agree to that by applying with us. But not, if they don't need, if it's someone who doesn't need to get a license, again, if it's in the water, it needs a license.
Yeah.
So,
And I will also say I'm pretty much 100% sure this dock does not have a license. In fact, it also doesn't have a house, so it is not an accessory use under the building code. So it's got other issues. And I guess for you, it would have to be on property with a single family home, or is it just private use?
so for the different, it's non-commercial is generally the standard. So there are situations where there may be a vacant property or
Right.
something where it's not buildable, but people want a dock there, the people who own it, because they just use it to come in for a dock. So it's still accessory to a single family residence, but it's just not the residence on that property.
Oh, wow.
Building department sees it differently.
Yes.
Okay,
And if
well,
you can clearly see where that foam is coming from, you can go have a conversation with the person and let them know it is a violation.
As a conservation commission, we have
Mhm.
that authority.
If it's
That- I guess
fill,
that's
yeah,
where
if it's breaking off and affecting the bank or a nearby marsh, it is a violation. It's fill.
Thank you. That clarifies, I think, that this issue.
okay, so I would like to go ahead and thank Mia and Chrissy and Daniel. This has been very informative. You've given us, I think, lots of homework, lots of resources. I, for one, and this really met my expectations and hopes for this. Are there any commissioners that have any other questions? So we're nearing the time where we have to jump on this and then go on to our official meeting at 7:30. Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Happy to
Thank you
do
for
it.
reaching out. Yeah.
And as questions come up, feel free to reach out, and I will send along that just some links so that if you want to go exploring or if you want to just use them to share with people, but we always say just send them to our email and we can help get them pointed in the right direction.
Thanks for coming.
That's great.
Anytime.
So it's 7:28, so I'd like to make a motion to close this meeting that started at 6:30 on March 21, 2023. Do we have a second?
All right, roll call vote. Kyle,
Kyle Maxfield, aye.
Carl,
Carl Melberg, aye.
Chase,
Cheers, everybody.
Sarah,
Sarah Seaward, aye.
myself, aye. It's unanimous. Thank you so much for everything tonight. This was extremely informative.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Hey, the
you.
rest of you on the other side. Good night.